Iris, I'm sorry. I suddenly opened my eyes from the endless darkness, that hoarse cry still lingering in my throat. My heart was pounding violently, and cold sweat soaked my back. Gasping for breath, it took a long while to see clearly what was before me. Not the cold hospital ward, nor her pale and emaciated face at the moment of her passing. The familiar bedroom ceiling, with the crystal chandelier refracting a soft halo of light. I froze. Slowly turning my head, I saw a slender figure lying beside me. Iris. She was curled up, her back to me, breathing evenly and shallowly. Her long black hair was scattered across the pillow, making her look frail and fragile. My breath hitched. A sharp pain surged in my chest, as if someone were tightly gripping my heart. In the last few decades of my previous life, I woke up countless times in an empty bedroom, reaching out to touch the cold sheets beside me, only to remember that she was no longer there. After she died, I rummaged through all her belongings. In an old diary pressed at the very bottom of the wardrobe, densely packed pages were filled with a side of her I had never seen. She liked her fried eggs sunny side up. The place she wanted to visit most was the seaside. Every time she made sweet and sour ribs, she made them for herself, because she knew I wouldn't come back to eat. She wrote, "Caleb didn't come back for dinner again today. I made sweet and sour ribs and finished them all alone. Actually, I wasn't hungry at all." She wrote, "I really want to go see the sea. But forget it, he won't accompany me." Those words, every stroke, were like knives carving into my heart. She never asked me for anything while she was alive, yet what did I give her? Coldness, suspicion, neglect, until she fell into depression and quietly closed her eyes on the hospital bed. And now she is right there, warm, alive, breathing. Iris! My voice was so hoarse it was unrecognizable. Startled by my movement, Iris woke up and opened her eyes in a daze. Seeing me staring at her, she instinctively shrank back toward the edge of the bed, her voice timid. "Caleb? What's wrong?" The fear in her eyes was like a needle, piercing deep into my heart. In my past life, every time I woke up and saw her, I was either cold or turned my back to her. So she had learned to shrink herself into the smallest space possible. "It's nothing." I took a deep breath. "Did you sleep well last night?" Iris froze. She stared at me with wide eyes, as if she had seen something unbelievable. I slept fine." Her voice was as quiet as a mosquito's hum. "That's good. I got out of bed. I'll go make you breakfast. What would you like to eat?" Iris was completely dumbfounded. She stood there with her mouth open, unable to speak for a long time. In my past life, I had never set foot in the kitchen. "Caleb, She looked at me cautiously. "Don't you have to go to the office today?" "It's the weekend today." I paused. "From today on, I'll spend more time with you." Iris's eyes instantly turned red. She lowered her head in panic, her voice choking. "And no, you don't have to. You go ahead with your work." She thought I was just being polite. My heart ached, and I crouched down to bring my eyes level with hers. "Iris, I'm serious. Sunny side up, right?" A moment of silence fell behind me. Then came the sound of a very faint intake of breath. I pretended not to hear and walked quickly out of the bedroom. Leaning against the wall in the hallway, I tilted my head back and closed my eyes, my throat tight. She would surely be confused, afraid, feel that something was wrong. But I couldn't tell her the truth. I could only use my actions every day from now on to make her slowly believe that this time, I am truly looking at her. But at that moment, Iris sat by the bed in the bedroom, staring at the doorway where I had vanished, her fingers tightly clutching the corner of the quilt. Her lips moved, and she mouthed a few words in silence. How did he know? He didn't even know whether I liked sweet or savory before. That question was very light, like a feather landing on the water, rippling outward before quickly sinking. She lowered her head and buried her face in her knees. After a long while, she gently sniffled. I walked into the kitchen and took out eggs and milk. The yolk broke when I cracked the first egg, so I switched to a new one. When I brought the finished dish out, Iris was already dressed and sitting at the dining table. Her eyes were still red, but her expression was much calmer. She took the breakfast, lowered her head, and took a bite. She chewed a few times, her eyelashes trembled slightly, but she said nothing. I sat down across from her, not staring at her, and opened my phone to deal with a few work messages. Halfway through the meal, she suddenly asked softly, "Have you been going through something lately?" "No." I put down my phone. "Why do you ask?" She didn't answer, just shook her head and continued eating her fried egg. But I knew what she was thinking. He's getting better, which is strange in itself. But she didn't press further. Perhaps because she was afraid that if she did, the improvement would disappear. That morning, I canceled a scheduled conference call. As I was clearing the dishes, she stood at the kitchen door, hesitated for a moment and said, "The weather is pretty nice today." "Yeah. Want to go out for a walk this afternoon?" She thought for a moment. "Where to? Where do you want to go?" She fell silent for a few seconds. Then, as if mustering her courage, said softly, "A new bookstore opened in the west of the city. I heard they sell those travel albums." "Okay. Let's go there." She lowered her head in response, turned, and walked away. After taking a few steps, she looked back at me. That glance was brief, but she was confirming. Confirming that I was still there. Confirming that the "okay just now" hadn't been a hallucination. That afternoon at the bookstore, she indeed spent the longest time in the travel album section. When she flipped to a photo of ocean waves, she stopped, her fingertips lightly tracing the page. I stood 2 bookshelves away, watching her through the gaps in the spines for a while, not approaching. She sensed something, glanced up in my direction, then lowered her head to continue flipping, but her pace slowed. On the way home that day, she sat in the passenger seat clutching the art book, her fingertips pressing against the cover, as if confirming something real. I glanced at her. She didn't speak, but I saw her place the book on her lap, rather than just stuffing it into her bag. For the next few days, the house seemed calm, but there was a string that remained taut. Wednesday evening, I was half an hour late getting home. The entryway light was on, and Iris sat on the living room sofa, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Hearing the door open, she stood up abruptly, her fingers gripping the cup so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You're back?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but she was hiding something. Traffic was backed up for a while. I changed my shoes and walked over. "Have you eaten?" She nodded, then shook her head. "Waiting for you." My heart tightened. In my past life, she waited for me like this too, waiting until the food went cold and was warmed up only to go cold again. When I came back, I wouldn't even ask a single question. Sometimes I would even frown because she hadn't eaten this late. I walked up to her and touched the teacup. It was cold. "Don't wait for me in the future. Go ahead and eat." "Okay." She agreed quickly, but I knew she wouldn't change. I took the teapot into the kitchen to brew a fresh pot. When I came back out, she was standing at the kitchen door. After hesitating for a moment, she said softly, "This afternoon, Mila called me." My movements paused for a second. "What did she say?" "She said." Iris twisted her fingers together. "You've suddenly been treating me so well lately because the company is in trouble and you need my family's connections to help." I put down my teacup and looked at her. "Did you believe her?" She didn't answer, lowering her head, her eyelashes trembling lightly. After a long while, she said softly, "She said similar things before. Every time you're a little nicer to me, she calls." "What did you do before?" "Before?" She raised her head. The corners of her mouth twitched as if she wanted to smile but couldn't quite manage it. "Before, I just couldn't trust you." That sentence was like a dull knife, slowly dragging across my chest. I walked up to her and looked earnestly into her eyes. "Iris, there is nothing wrong with the company. What I did to you has nothing to do with the company. Do you believe me?" She remained silent for a long time, so long that I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she looked up, her eyes slightly red, but her gaze fixed directly on me. "I don't know if I should believe it, but I want to try." Okay. My voice was a bit hoarse. Then let's try. That night, I didn't say things like, I don't want to lose you. I just sat beside her and watched a movie she had picked. She put on an old film about a postman delivering letters to residents on an island. The screen showed vast stretches of sea and reefs, with waves crashing against the shore. She watched intently, but she didn't linger on any single frame for as long as she had when flipping through the album last time. In one part of the story, the postman received an unsigned letter. She sniffled softly, then picked up the remote and pressed pause to go pour a glass of water. When she came back and sat down, she said, I guess that letter was written by him to himself. I said, maybe. She let out a pressed the play button, and didn't say anything else. After the movie ended, she turned off the TV, glanced at me and asked, Go to the seaside this weekend? I paused for a moment. She brought it up first. Let's go. Stay for a night, watch the sunrise. She didn't speak, just nodded, and went back to her room. I sat in the living room and heard her opening a drawer in the bedroom, closing it, then opening it again. She was probably going through that album again. Late Friday night, the assistant called. Mr. Caleb, Victor has made his move. He arranged for 4 people, planning to strike tomorrow afternoon at the shopping mall in the south of the city. The target is confirmed to be Mrs. Iris. Source of the information? Our people deduced it from financial movements. He moved a sum of cash in the last 3 days and rented 2 vans. Combined with the personnel movements all pointing to the south of the city, the time window is tomorrow. Also, someone on his end has been repeatedly confirming Mrs. Iris's schedule for tomorrow. I stood by the window in the study, looking out at the night. Does he know Iris is going to the south of the city tomorrow? He doesn't know the specific time, but he knows it's tomorrow. Good. My gaze turned cold. Arrange the team. After she enters the mall tomorrow, don't tip them off. Wait for them to make the first move, then catch them in the act. Understood. Hanging up the phone, I dialed the head of security. Tomorrow afternoon, I need 6 people, plain clothes with equipment. I'll send you the target location. Copy that. Putting down my phone, I returned to the bedroom. Iris was already asleep, lying on her side, breathing evenly. Moonlight leaked through a gap in the curtains, falling on her face. Her brows were still slightly furrowed, as if she were restless even in her dreams. I sat gently on the edge of the bed, not touching her. In my past life on that day, I was in a meeting with my phone on silent, and I missed 3 calls from her. By the time I saw the missed calls and called back, she had already been taken from the mall. Tomorrow it won't happen again. But what about after tomorrow? Will she be even more afraid to go out because of this? Will she feel that she is never safe with me? I sat in the dark and thought for a long time. Then I made another decision to tell her about the plan. Not everything, but at least let her know. On Saturday morning, as she sat at the dining table drinking porridge, I spoke up, Iris, I'm going to that mall in the south of the city this afternoon too. She looked up, slightly surprised. Today? Yes, but there's something I need to tell you first. I put down my chopsticks and looked into her eyes. Victor, that business rival I mentioned to you last time, he might make a move against you at the mall today. I've already arranged for protection so you won't be harmed. But for this to work, I need you to be there. Only if you're there will he make a move. And only if he makes a move will I have evidence. The spoon in Iris's hand stopped in midair, and the porridge dripped from the edge back into the bowl. She stared at me for several seconds. Are you saying you want me to be the bait? Yes. I didn't avoid the question. But I won't let you get close to danger. My people are around. Just go in and browse normally like you usually do. Leave the rest to me. She slowly put down her spoon, lowered her head, and thought for a long time. Then she asked, How many people have you arranged? 6. Can they guarantee that I won't be touched? Yes. She was quiet for a moment, then looked up at me. Okay, I'll go. I thought she would be afraid, would hesitate, would ask, Can I not go? But she said, Okay. Her tone so calm it surprised me. She saw the look on my face, lowered her head, and continued eating her porridge, saying softly, "You have to deal with those people. Otherwise, next time and the time after that, I'll still have to hide." I looked at her lowered eyelashes and said nothing. That morning, while I was washing the dishes, my movements were very slow. I remembered how in my past life, she would hide back inside the house just because a neighbor's dog barked twice. And now she was saying, "You have to deal with those people." She was learning not to hide anymore. Afternoon, the mall in the south of the city. Iris was flipping through a magazine at the bookstore on the first floor. Through the glass, I saw her pause at a certain page. Probably another travel album. I watched her from the cafe on the third floor as the voice of the security team captain came through my earphones. "Target has entered. 4 suspects are in position. 1 at the east entrance, 1 at the west entrance, and 2 at the second floor escalator landing. Wait for them to make a move before apprehending." Understood. Iris stayed in the bookstore for over 10 minutes, bought a magazine, and then slowly walked toward the first floor corridor. Those 4 started to move, converging from 3 directions. I saw her footsteps falter for an instant. She might have sensed something, but then she continued walking forward. A short command came through the earpiece. "Move." 6 people quickly closed in from different directions. 4 men in dark coats were pinned to the ground, and a commotion instantly erupted around them. Iris stood a few meters away, clutching the magazine, her face pale but composed. I strode through the crowd to her. "Are you okay?" She looked up and saw me, her lips moving slightly. "Did he make his move?" "It moved. It was caught." She nodded and handed the magazine in her hand to me. Another travel brochure with a coastline printed on the cover. I took it. She walked a few steps forward, then stopped and looked back at me. "Caleb, next time you come to keep me company while I shop, I won't buy magazines." "Buy what?" She thought for a moment. "I saw a sweater. Didn't try it on. Next time." The head of security hurried over. "Mr. Caleb, we've caught all 4. Victor himself showed up too, at the main entrance. He just left." "Follow him." "Already following." I turned back around. Iris stood there, looking down at her hands, trembling slightly. But she didn't cry. She just slowly clenched and then unclenched her hands, then said to me, "Let's go. Shall we not stroll a while longer?" "No more strolling," she said. "It's not safe enough today. Next time, you come with me." On the way back that day, she slept for a while leaning against the passenger seat. When they were almost home, she woke up. Watching the streets passing by outside the window, she suddenly said, "You just said those 4 were caught. And then? And then it will lead to Victor. Will he look for someone else in the future?" "No," I said. "He won't have another chance." She gave a soft and closed her eyes again. When she got out of the car after we arrived home, I said from behind her, "Iris, thank you for today." She stopped, turned back to glance at me, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. "You just need to accompany me to try on that sweater next time." Victor's counterattack came faster than I expected. On Monday, an anonymous report alleging Liu family's illegal operations suddenly surfaced regarding the project in the southern city that we had been competing over for 2 years. On Wednesday, 2 suppliers with whom we had cooperated for years terminated their contracts simultaneously. On Friday, rumors about the Liu family's capital chain breaking started circulating online. My assistant looked grim as he placed the documents on my desk. 3 lines of attack moving at once. Victor really spared no expense this time. After reviewing the documents, I pulled out a copy of the report materials and flipped through a couple of pages, then suddenly stopped. There was a summary of an internal meeting record inside. A meeting whose contents were known only to the Liu family's core management. And on that list of management, Mila's name was still there 2 months ago. Who submitted the report? We checked. It was anonymous, but the scope of knowledge indicated by the content is very small. Mila. I put down the file. Before she left, she copied these meeting minutes. The assistant paused. "But weren't you at the time?" "I let her copy it." I interrupted him. She thinks she got something useful. That meeting record was modified. The data doesn't match, but the structure looks real. The assistant stared at me wide-eyed, taking a long moment before saying, "You let her take it on purpose? Only with this in hand will she think she has leverage. With leverage, she'll go help Victor." I leaned back in my chair. Now she has. The electronic signature on the whistleblower materials is hers too. The chain of evidence is complete. As for the suppliers, I had the assistant meet with the third party, Owen. With the other two gone, Owen happened to want to expand his supply, so he signed a new agreement on the spot. Regarding the online rumors, I simply released the annual report data, no explanations, just the facts. The tide turned within 3 days. Victor had 3 lines of attack. 2 were dead, and the remaining whistleblowing line turned into his own mess. The materials Mila submitted were fake, and she signed her name on those fake documents. This amounts to forgery plus defamation, enough to get her sued. I called my lawyer. Prepare the materials. Victor. Attempted kidnapping, commercial defamation, bribery. Mila. Forgery, leaking trade secrets, complicity. Evidence. Kidnapping. The confessions of the 4 arrested suspects. They implicated Victor's orders. Bribery. The funds Victor used to bribe the supplier went through his associated accounts. There are clear records of that money trail. Mila's electronic signature and transfer records. I'm sending them to you. Enough. Also, I paused. Let everyone in the Liu family know exactly why Mila was removed this time. It was raining on the day Mila came to see me. She stood downstairs at the office building for half an hour, and the receptionist called 3 times to say, "Miss Mila insists on seeing you." I told her to come up. Her hair was half wet when she walked in, her face pale and eyes red and swollen. Standing in front of my desk, her first words were, "Caleb, I was wrong. Please let me go." I looked at her, expressionless. "Where did you go wrong? I shouldn't have helped Victor. I shouldn't have taken those meeting minutes." "Then do you know that those meeting minutes were fake?" She froze for a moment. Then, as if realizing something, she suddenly raised her head. "You did it on purpose? Right? I let you take the fake one and then you handed it to Victor. He used the fake materials to report me, and you signed your own name." I stood up and walked to the window. "Mila, if you had just taken one genuine document from me, I would have let you slide for second uncle's sake. But you took the fake one, and now the entire report has turned into a fabrication by you. Forgery, defamation. The evidence is all there." Mila's face instantly drained of color. Her mouth hung open, and it took her a long while to squeeze out a voice. You were waiting for me to take this step from the very beginning? I gave you plenty of chances to stop. Second uncle came to you, tried to talk you out of it. Did you stop? I turned to look at her. If you had stopped, we wouldn't be here today. She stood before me, shoulders trembling violently, large tears rolling down her face. I watched her cry, but my heart didn't soften. In my past life, when Iris closed her eyes on her hospital bed, this person was attending a banquet. She wore a pink gown, smiling brightly as she told people, "My brother is finally at peace. You can go now," I said. "The lawyer will contact you." Mila stood there motionless, tears streaming down her face, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something. Finally, she lowered her head, turned around, and walked away. The moment the door closed, I heard a stifled sob coming from the hallway. I went back to my desk and sat down. I didn't go after her. On the day of Victor's trial, I was the only one in the public gallery. Iris wanted to come, but I wouldn't let her. The verdict came down 15 years. With the asset freeze and the business ban, he basically has no chance of making a comeback. The lawyer beside me said, "The chain of evidence is complete. He didn't defend himself the entire time." I didn't answer. As I walked out of the courthouse gates, the sunlight was blinding. When I got home, Iris was watering flowers on the balcony. Hearing the door open, she turned her head, glanced at me, put down the watering can, and walked over to ask, "The verdict? 15 years." She stood there, silent for a few seconds. The wind blew in from outside, and she raised a hand to smooth her tousled hair, then asked, "Will anyone else come in the future?" I stood at the entryway watching her. The devil's ivy on the balcony cascaded down the plant stand, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the flower pot, slightly curled. "I won't anymore," I said. She lowered her head, as if digesting these words. After a long while, she gave a soft and turned to walk back to the balcony to continue watering the flowers. I changed my shoes and walked over, standing beside her. She handed the watering can to me. "Help me water that succulent too. I think it's a bit dry." I took it and watered it a few times. She stood watching from the side and suddenly said, "Do you think the question I just asked was silly?" "No. What I actually wanted to ask was, can we go out normally from now on?" She turned her head to look at me, without anyone following us. "Yes," I said, "starting today." She didn't say anything else. She just took the watering can from my hand and watered another pot of flowers. That evening we went out for a meal, at a small restaurant right across from our residential complex. 2 bowls of noodles, a plate of cold appetizers. She took a few bites and said, "They put too much soy sauce in this place." I said, "We'll go somewhere else next time." She lowered her head and continued eating. That meal took nearly an hour. No security guards following us, no plainclothes officers lurking nearby. After she finished the last bite, she put down her chopsticks and let out a soft sigh, as if she had confirmed something. It was mid-September. The weather still held a trace of summer heat, but the morning and evening breezes were beginning to turn cool. Iris started going out to work. A charity organization. She went 3 days a week to help organize supplies and plan activities. I didn't stop her. In her past life, she stayed at home all the time, shutting herself away day after day. In this life, I want her to have a life of her own. But I'm also worried. She hasn't dealt with outsiders for so long. Will she retreat? On her first day back from work, there was a faint curve at the corner of her mouth when she came in. After changing her shoes, she placed a bag of fruit on the table. Colleagues gave it to me. They said new hires have to share. What kind of fruit? Tangerines, imported ones. She peeled one and handed it to me. "Have a taste." I took it and ate a segment. It was quite sweet. "Delicious," I said. She curled the corners of her lips, then turned around to wash her hands. That night, she voluntarily told me about her work, who showed her around, who assigned her a desk, and how many items were on the supply list. She spoke slowly, occasionally pausing to think of the right words, but unlike before, she didn't trail off and say, "Forget it, never mind." I listened attentively, occasionally responding with a word or two. When she went to pour water after finishing, I noticed her steps were much lighter than they had been a few months ago. But one evening a week later, she suddenly fell silent for a long time. She hadn't been quite right emotionally when she came home from work that day. After changing her clothes, she sat on the sofa for an hour, flipping through a magazine, turning back and forth to the same page. I asked her what was wrong, and she hesitated for a moment before saying, "Today a colleague at the agency told me, your husband treats you so well, picking you up and dropping you off every day. What's wrong with that?" She closed the magazine and said in a low voice. After she said that, what went through my mind was, if one day you stop picking me up, will they say, "See, I told you so?" I sat next to her, not in a hurry to answer. After a moment of silence, I said, "Iris, I pick you up and drop you off because I want to. But if one day you don't want me to drive you, you can drive yourself, take the subway or catch a ride with a colleague. It doesn't matter which one you choose." She looked at me, as if she hadn't expected me to say that. "What I mean is," I continued, "whether or not I drive you, you don't need anyone else to judge whether you're living a good life. As long as you feel it's good, then it is good." She didn't speak, but her fingers gripping the magazine slowly relaxed. After a while, she said softly, "I'll take the subway myself tomorrow." "Okay." The next day, she really did take the subway. Before leaving, she stood in the entryway for a while, looked back at me, then adjusted her bag strap, opened the door, and walked out. When she came back that evening, she said, "The subway is pretty fast," her tone carrying a faint, relieved air, as if she had accomplished something on her own. From that day on, she started taking the subway to and from work by herself. I no longer drove her every day, but occasionally she would send a message, "It's raining today, can you come pick me up?" And I would go. She was slowly finding a balance, not dependence nor complete independence. Rather, it was, "I can walk on my own, but I know you will be there." In October, Uncle Arthur hosted a small family dinner. They called it a family dinner, but everyone knew exactly what it was. After Mila was removed from the records, this was the family's first formal gathering together, effectively serving as an external confirmation of where the wind was blowing. Iris was a bit hesitant at first. "Would it be awkward if I went?" "No. You are my wife." She looked at me, as if gauging the weight of those words. Then she nodded. That day she wore a light apricot knee-length dress and didn't wear heavy jewelry, just a pair of small pearl studs. I glanced at her a couple of times. She noticed and smoothed her skirt self-consciously. "What is it?" "Yes, it looks good," I said. She lowered her head and smiled, saying nothing. At the dinner, the relatives were much more polite to her. In the past, they would ask in front of her, "What has Iris been busy with at home lately?" Their tone carrying a subtle scrutiny. This time, no one asked such questions. Two elders even took the initiative to talk to her about the charity organization, saying, "It's good for young people to go out and do something." Iris didn't handle it with total ease, but she didn't stage fright either. She didn't speak loudly, but her voice was steady. Occasionally she would glance at me. I didn't give her any extra prompts, just a slight nod. Then she would continue to finish what she was saying. On the car ride back after the gathering, she leaned against the passenger seat watching the streetlights passing by outside the window, and suddenly said, "They were more polite to me today than before." "Yeah. It's because you handled Mila's situation. That's part of it," I said. "But mostly it's you yourself. You were great the whole time today." She turned her head and glanced at me, saying nothing. But I saw the corners of her mouth curling up, and she didn't let the smile drop all the way home. One weekend in November, she brought up the seaside trip again. "You said last time you'd go on the weekend, but it didn't happen." She sat on the sofa, looking at the weather forecast on her phone. "It's sunny this weekend." I put down the document in my hand. "Then let's go this weekend. We'll leave Friday afternoon and come back Sunday." She gave a soft and lowered her head to continue looking at her phone. A few seconds later, she looked up again. "That homestay you mentioned before. Where did you hear about it?" The pen in my hand paused for a moment. That homestay was the one she had written about in her diary. "I saw people online say that the balcony of that homestay offers a view of the sunrise over the sea. If only someone could take me there someday. But that was from a past life." "A friend recommended it," I said. "They said it's great for watching the sunrise." She glanced at me but didn't press further. I noticed, though, that later she secretly looked up photos of that homestay and studied them for a long time. We set off on Friday afternoon. It was a 2-hour drive. She didn't say much along the way, but she kept watching the scenery out the window. Whenever she saw large stretches of farmland, she would let out a soft ah. And when she caught the silhouette of mountains in the distance, she would stare for quite a while. We arrived in the evening. The sea was gray-blue, and the wind was a bit chilly. Standing on the steps at the entrance of the homestay, she took a deep breath, then turned to me and said, "Just as I imagined." "What's the same?" "The smell of the sea," she said. "I once read in a book that the sea breeze is salty. It really is salty." She stood on the steps for a long time. The wind blew her hair, and she squinted at the line where the sea and sky met in the distance, her whole body relaxing. That night we sat on the balcony of the homestay for a long time. Wrapped in a blanket, holding a cup of hot milk, she looked out at the sea in the darkness and suddenly said, "Caleb." I turned my head to look at her. She was still looking at the sea, but her voice was calm. "When you were by my side before, I always felt that you weren't here. Now you are here, and your mind is here too." The sea breeze scattered her voice a little, but I heard every word clearly. I was silent for a moment, then reached out to tuck her blanket tighter around her. "And you?" She turned her head to look at me, her eyes bright in the moonlight. "I'm here too," she said. The following spring, Iris became pregnant. That morning, she stood at the bathroom door holding the pregnancy test, her expression somewhere between surprise and nervousness. As I passed by, she called out to me and handed it over. I looked down at it, then looked back up at her. She pursed her lips, looking at me a little helplessly. "When did you check?" "Just now." I put down the documents in my hand, walked over to her, and reached out to press on her shoulder. "Sit down first." She was pressed onto the sofa, still in a daze, clutching the pregnancy test with both hands. I squatted down, looking up at her. "Iris, how are you feeling?" She froze for a moment, as if she hadn't expected me to ask that first. Then her eyes grew a bit red, though her tone remained steady. "A little scared." "Scared of what?" She lowered her head, her fingers tracing the edge of the pregnancy test. "Scared I won't be a good mother. I used to. I couldn't even take good care of myself." My heart ached, and I held her hand. "Then let's learn together." She looked up at me, and after a while, gave a gentle nod. That evening, when I came home from work, I found her sitting in the study. Several pregnancy and childbirth guides were spread out on the desk, and her phone screen displayed a pregnancy tracking app. She was reading so intently that she didn't even notice me come in. I leaned against the doorframe and watched for a while, not disturbing her. She had a severe reaction during the first trimester, vomiting everything she ate. I tried to move my work home so I could rush back at noon to cook some light porridge for her. Every time she would only take a few sips before putting it down. But she never said, "You don't need to come back." One night she was vomiting severely in the middle of the night. I got up and poured her a glass of warm water. Her hands were still shaking when she took the cup. She took a few sips, put it down, leaned against the headboard, and said softly, "You said we'd learn together? But what if I can't learn it? Then we'll just learn a little slower." I took the cup from her and placed it on the nightstand. "The baby isn't in any rush." She was amused by my words and smiled. A faint smile, but the corners of her mouth did indeed curve upward. Then she lay back down, turned over, and with her back to me, her voice muffled in the pillow said, "Don't go." "I won't go. Not tonight. Later." I sat by the bed, looking at the loose hair on the back of her head, and reached out to pull the quilt up a little. "Yeah, I'm not leaving." She didn't say anything more. After a while, her breathing became even, and she fell asleep. That night she vomited 3 times, and I brought her water 3 times. When she woke at daybreak and saw me sitting there, she blinked several times, then said softly, "You really didn't leave all night." I said I wasn't leaving. She lowered her head, then raised it again after a while, reached out to take the water glass from the bedside table, took a sip, and didn't say anything more. But that morning, she initiated a conversation with me, asking, "What do you want to eat for lunch?" That was the first time she had ever asked me what I wanted to eat. Not, "I'm fine with anything," but, "What do you want to eat?" Her condition improved a bit during the second trimester. She started going to prenatal checkups by herself. Once, when she came back, she told me that the doctor said the baby was developing well, and she asked me to look at the ultrasound scan. There was a small, blurry image on the slip, and she pointed at it saying, "This is a hand, and these are feet." I couldn't really see it clearly, but she was very serious as she spoke. On the weekend, we went to buy baby supplies together. She stood in front of the shelves for a long time, picking things up, putting them down and picking them up again, finally choosing 2 sets of light blue onesies. She said, "They can be worn by a boy or a girl." I followed her carrying the shopping basket. She turned back and asked me, "Does this look good?" I said, "Everything you pick looks good." She rolled her eyes at me, but the corners of her mouth were turned up. It wasn't until she fell asleep in the study that I discovered she had tucked a piece of paper inside that pregnancy guide. On it were a few lines of her own notes. 14 weeks, starting to feel him moving. very small like a fish blowing bubbles. 16 weeks, first ultrasound showing him moving. Caleb went with me today. He watched for a long time. 18 weeks, went to the hospital alone today. I was a bit nervous on the way, but I made it. I looked at it for a long time, then folded the paper and tucked it back where it belonged without telling her. Once during the 3rd trimester, she woke up in the middle of the night with a leg cramp, gasping in pain. I'm a light sleeper, so I sat up immediately when I heard the movement and reached out to pull her foot back. She leaned against the headboard, a thin layer of sweat on her forehead, biting her lip as she waited for me to finish the massage. Better? I asked. She slowly exhaled, nodded, glanced down at her belly, and suddenly said, "He just kicked me. Probably because he thinks you're being too noisy." She gave me an annoyed swat, but she smiled. I lay back down and it took her a long while to fall back asleep. That night, I lay awake listening to her breathing for a long time, steady and long, interspersed with a few turns. Moonlight leaked through a gap in the curtains, falling on her swollen belly. In late August, the baby was born. It was a girl. I kept watch the entire night. She lay on the delivery bed, drenched in sweat, biting her lip to stay silent as she pushed. The nurse said, "It's okay to cry out, Mrs. Iris." But she shook her head and kept gritting her teeth. I stood by her side, holding one of her hands, my knuckles turning white from her grip, yet I didn't let go. The moment the baby cried, she went completely limp, her eyes half closed and her lips pale. When the nurse held the cleaned baby up to her, she forced her eyes open, took one look, her lips twitched slightly, and then she fell asleep. I stood by the bed watching them. The baby was a tiny bundle wrapped in swaddling clothes. Iris was sleeping soundly, her breathing steady. In that moment, I stood by the bed watching for a long time. The ending from my past life had truly been rewritten. But what reassured me even more was, the expression on her face as she slept was relaxed. Her brow wasn't furrowed. The first thing she said after waking up was, "Where's the baby?" "Right here. Just been fed." She turned her head to look at the small cradle, then turned back to look at me. "How long have you been watching?" "Not long." She smiled. "Liar. Since you fell asleep." She didn't call me out. She just said, "Let me hug you." I gently placed the child into the crook of her arm. She lowered her head to gaze at that wrinkled little face for a long time. Then she looked up, her eyes slightly red, but her voice steady. "Caleb, we have a child. You've worked hard." She shook her head. "You said you would stay with me." Outside the window, the August midday sun streamed in brightly, dyeing the bedsheets and the corners of the quilt a warm white. The child had fallen asleep in her arms. She gently patted the swaddling clothes and hummed a tune that was slightly off-key. I sat in the chair by the bed watching this scene. She was alive, smiling, holding our child in her arms, and I was sitting beside her. She looked up at me, then lowered her head to look at the baby again. Sunlight fell on the side of her face, her brow relaxed. The first month after leaving the hospital and returning home was chaotic. The baby needed to be fed every 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the night. Iris insisted on breastfeeding. For the first 2 weeks, her nipples were cracked, and she would frown in pain every time she nursed. I would wake up as soon as I heard the baby crying in the middle of the night, and when she sat up to feed, I would silently go to the kitchen to heat a hot water bottle, wrap it in a towel, and hand it to her to cushion her lower back. The first time she took it, she paused for a moment, looked down at the tightly wrapped towel bundle and said nothing. Later, every time she nursed, that hot water bottle would appear promptly behind her lower back. One time when I handed it to her, she asked, "When did you learn this?" "Looked it up online." She pressed the hot water bottle against her lower back and asked softly, "What else did you look up?" "How to burp the baby, how to change diapers, how to massage the belly for gas." She looked down at the child in her arms, fell silent for a moment and said, "Then let me see you change one." The next afternoon, she actually handed me a diaper that was half changed. I followed the steps taught in the video. Unfastening, wiping, putting on a new one, and fastening the Velcro. Iris watched from the side the whole time and didn't interfere. When I was done, she looked down to check. It wasn't crooked, and there were no leaks. "All right," she said. "From now on, this task is yours." I laughed. "Okay." But she immediately reached out to rip the Velcro open and readjusted it, saying, "You fastened it too tight. It's digging into her legs. Didn't you just say it was fine?" I finished checking. She refastened it without batting an eyelid. "Now it's fine." I didn't argue anymore and looked down at the child. The little girl kicked her legs, innocently blowing a milk bubble. On the day we were naming our child, we sat in the living room, poring over dictionaries and poetry collections for quite a while. She suggested 3, I vetoed 2, and for the remaining one I said, "It's all right." She looked up at me. "What do you mean, all right?" "It means it's good. Just say good, if that's what you mean. No need to say all right." I put down the dictionary. "Good." She continued turning the pages, and after a while asked another, "Then how about this one?" "Okay." She looked up at me again. "You were just brushing me off this time." "I'm not brushing you off. The ones you suggested are all good. I just can't choose." She closed the dictionary, stared at me for 2 seconds, and finally said, "Let's leave it for now, we'll decide tomorrow." Then she picked up the baby to feed him. Halfway there, she turned back and added, "You have to come up with a name tomorrow. You can't just say good." The next day, I wrote down 5 names on a piece of paper and handed it to her. After reading it, she chose the 3rd one. I folded the paper and put it away in the drawer. Later, I discovered that she had written the same name in her own planner, followed by a crooked little star. A few more years passed. One weekend afternoon, the child was lying on the living room floor drawing. They drew a blue blob and said it was the sea. Iris squatted beside them and asked, "Why is there another sun?" Without looking up, the child said, "Because it looks nice." I sat on the sofa flipping through documents and glanced over at them. Iris let out a and said, "It really does look nice," then picked up another crayon and drew a crooked seashell next to it. The child glanced at her drawing and offered a serious critique. "Mommy's doesn't look like the real thing." Iris smiled. "Then teach me." She pulled the child in front of her, guiding her hand to draw it all over again. With their heads close together, crayons and drawing paper were scattered across the floor. Sunlight streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling window, overlaying their 2 shadows. I watched them for a moment, set down my documents, and walked over to sit beside Iris. The child handed me a dark blue crayon. "Daddy, you draw the waves." I drew a long wavy line at the bottom of the drawing paper. The child looked at it, gave a satisfied hum, then lowered her head to continue drawing her son. Iris turned her head and glanced at me, saying nothing, but she reached out and lightly brushed the back of my hand. Very gently. Then she withdrew her hand and went back to drawing the patterns on the seashell for the child. That drawing was later stuck on the refrigerator. On the shimmering blue sea, there was a lopsided sun, an oval that could barely be recognized as a seashell, a small boat, and 3 wavy lines of varying heights. Scrawled beside them were 3 characters, our family. Every time I passed the refrigerator, I would see it. Once, Iris also stopped and looked at it for a while when she walked by, then turned to me and said, "The waves you drew aren't bad." I laughed and said, "The seashell you drew doesn't look quite right. I'm painting abstract art." "You win." She smiled and walked away. The child ran over and asked, "Mom, where are you going?" She turned her head and replied, "Going to pour some water," but then got her hem tugged and was dragged back to look at the drawing. I stood at the kitchen door, holding a cup of water and watching them. The child started drawing a new sea on another piece of paper, with Iris occasionally chiming in from the side. The summer breeze outside lifted a corner of the curtain, scattering sunlight across the floor. The past is far away now. The self who used to wake up in the dead of night calling her name. Those old times spent sitting all night long in an empty bedroom. They all seem separated by a very, very thick fog. I rarely think of them anymore. They were talking about something in the living room, the child laughed, and Iris laughed too. I stood there holding my water glass for a moment, then set it down and walked back to the living room to sit down again. The child handed me a crayon. "Daddy, draw another boat." I took it and drew a very small boat in the corner of the drawing paper. Outside the window, the cicadas' chirping was long and distant, sunlight spreading across the floor between the three of us. Iris lowered her head to draw, the tips of her hair hanging down. She reached up and tucked them behind her ear. I glanced at her. She didn't look up, but the corners of her mouth curled slightly. That drawing later stayed on the refrigerator for a long time.